This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
What is it they call this time of year? March Madness. God. I wish that were merely an exaggeration. Maybe it's just because I lost an hour of sleep the other night, but oh man, I'm definitely feeling the March Madness right now. It's either that or lack of sleep. It also didn't help that the previous 2 nights I didn't get home until like close to 11 for my 2 gigs. I mean, I'm the guy that's usually in bed by 10 o'clock at the latest. I don't know, my body has a hard time making those adjustments when I stay up longer. So I'm kind of fighting fumes at the moment. I have just enough energy to try to blast through this wrestling report, or a series of wrestling reports. Luckily for me, I get to talk about Retro Raw, which actually wasn't a bad show this week. They threw me a bone. Realizing that I lost an hour of sleep, they didn't test my patience as much. SmackDown was another story entirely. I had a rough time getting through that one, even with the minimal amount of fast forwarding I actually did. But before we get into all the rigmarole, if you are watching the show for the first time, make sure you subscribe, comment, give the podcast a like. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content. Still a couple weeks out before all the WrestleMania chaos kicks in. I'm still trying to map out how I actually want to plan all that. I mean, depending on how much time I have that weekend, that might be a time where we just kind of drop the Retro NXT and Retro Raw reports and try to leave enough time to cover everything for both nights of WrestleMania. Because those shows are going to be freaking long. Man, anytime these podcasts start reaching the 2-hour mark, I start to get really antsy during the editing process. I mean, it seems like I have less and less time to actually format these things anymore. So I'm trying not to overextend my workload. But I'll keep you all in the loop about that as we edge closer. So for the time being, guess we'll go ahead and dig into some of this retro stuff. Oh, we'll get into SmackDown shortly too. But let's go ahead and kick it off with Retro Raw, this March 13th, 1995 edition. And again, I have to give WWF some credit here. They actually put forth a little bit of effort here for this hour-long show. Meaning that they actually tried to promote a couple different matches for the card instead of just giving you one TV main event surrounded by a bunch of void filler. Now, that's not to say the secondary TV matches were any good, but it's the effort that counts. We'll talk about the one they false advertised within the first 3 minutes of the show. Boy, that's some classic WWF marketing right there. But of course, the featured bout for this week was Bret Hart versus Jerry Lawler in a feud that dates all the way back to the mid-spring of 1993. Think about that for a minute. Remember when we were sitting here reviewing Lawler's confrontation with Bret's family in the balcony area of the Grand Ballroom? That was 2 years ago. This feud is still ongoing. Wow. And obviously you had to figure they're not going to blow the feud off on free TV with 1 week's build. This was more or less them trying to reacquaint the audience with the rivalry and set up post-WrestleMania plans. That's how trivial WrestleMania 11 was in the grand scheme of things. They were already kicking the can down the road and thinking about stuff after WrestleMania. And of course, for those wondering, well, if that's the case, why didn't they just book Bret versus Lawler at Mania instead of Bret versus Backlund in that snooze fest of an I Quit match? The answer is because Vince McMahon. And if you need further elaboration, you've clearly never watched a WWF program in your entire life. So this is awesome. In the opening VTR, Vince is doing the regular show rundown. And at first, when I saw what they did here, I was like, okay, did I dream I just watched that VTR in full? Or did they legitimately false advertise their opening match on the show? Originally, I thought it was going to be the Blue Brothers versus the 1-2-3 Kid and Bob Holly. And so when the match we got instead was the Blue Brothers versus the Head Shrinkers, I was like, am I watching the wrong show? Or did I misinterpret this as a match they were setting up for another show? Nope. Turns out they had already shot a VTR beforehand, realized that Bob Holly couldn't make the show, and then had to make up a lousy excuse for why he wasn't there. And naturally, because of Bob Holly's gimmick, guess what the excuse was? Car trouble. And not just any car trouble. The announcers were legitimately joking about him crashing his race car. Because, vehicular calamities are hilarious. Someone could have died. That's comedy. So, presuming Bob Holly didn't actually get into an automobile accident, well, the match had to be changed anyway. Again, why they left that in the opening graphic, I couldn't tell you. Obviously, the shows are taped, so they could have easily edited that part out where Holly and Kid were advertised to wrestle this week. But whatever. The match is mostly just okay. The best worker between the two teams was Dutch Mantel. And of course, he's the poor sap on the floor having to manage the Blue Brothers instead of wrestling. And I've already done the 40-minute tangent on how horrible the Harris brothers were. I don't think Jim Cornette and I will ever see eye to eye on the talent ability of the Harris twins. They were beyond fucking rotten. Now, the action did pick up a little bit toward the end once Fatu came in and started cleaning shop. The rest of the time when the Blue Brothers were on offense, it was tediously slow and boring. I will say, the one impressive thing about watching a match like this, taking into account the size of the Harris twins, the fact that they were easily overpowering the Barbarian. Think about that for a minute. They towered over this man. I can count on one hand the amount of guys I have ever seen visibly overpower the Barbarian in a wrestling match. God, I forgot how massive the Harris brothers were. But they all wound up fighting to the back during a four-way brawl at the end. So it was ruled a double countout. And the finish went over like a fart in church for the crowd. I can't say for sure what the finish would have been had the match gone according to plan. But my opinion still stands on what I think of the Harris brothers as workers. But my opinion still stands when it comes to the Blue Brothers. And babyface head shrinkers will always be a weird thing to think about. So after we got some dry Lawrence Taylor commentary on the Mania match with Bam Bam, Vincent Cornette started rattling off a bunch of more famous football players, including another name that would soon become synonymous with the wrestling industry in the next year or so. We got a special cameo from Steve Mongo McMichael. Indeed. The same Steve McMichael that would find himself on Nitro in the fall of this year, working as the color guy for the opposition. Whoops. Now, he mainly called out Kama, apparently for making discouraging marks toward him at some point. Said he will be on Raw next week to challenge him face-to-face. And the one thing I'll say, not to diminish the promo entirely, the one thing Mongo was always good at, cutting promos. That guy could talk his ass off. Couldn't wrestle his way out of a wet paper bag. But goddamn it, he could talk. And staying on the topic of other famous names in the wrestling industry, also factoring in the crossover talents from the football profession, we got the big cat Ernie Ladd to make an appearance this week. And he is here to let us know that while he respects the pride and the passion of Lawrence Taylor, Ladd believes that he's fighting on emotion. He's trying to enter a field that he's not well equipped for. He says that it took him years of training and putting his nose to the grindstone in order to make that crossover from football to wrestling. But the problem for LT is that he hasn't spent enough time training in wrestling to understand what he's getting himself into. So he doesn't like his chances. Of course, it's always great seeing the big cat. It is a voice that you always remember from the moment you hear that tone and inflection. Very well spoken. And, a lot of this was mainly designed to promote LT versus Bam Bam. It was kind of cool, I guess, hearing a couple pro football players weigh in and share their opinion on the matter. You know, in the case of Mongo, he wasn't selling LT short. Like, he had all the confidence in the world that LT could get the job done. But as for Ernie, he's like, well, I've been in the ring. I know the kind of punishment it puts on the human body. It's not as easy as LT might think it seems. Again, it's a shame that this has taken priority over Diesel versus Shawn. But then again, this is always kind of how Vince viewed WrestleMania. It was all about the spectacle of the big mainstream names and all the famous celebrities. The wrestling was kind of subordinate to all that. Speaking of wrestling, we had a little more of that to cover this week, including a relatively short but still fun Jeff Jarrett versus Barry Horowitz match. They're currently doing that slow burn build with Horowitz where they keep referencing the fact that he's never won a match, but they're going so over the top with it. Like, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, something's clearly going to happen at some point. Well, he didn't win this one, but he gave Double J a hard-fought bout. Horowitz stayed in control of Jarrett for a good chunk of it until the very end when he went for a high knee, but supposedly blew it out on the landing. So Jarrett chop blocked him from behind and worked him over for another minute before beating him with the figure four. And again, he's not an outright jobber in the traditional sense. Like, now he's starting to actually get a little bit of offense in during his matches. So we'll see how this develops. And all the while, Jarrett is still the IC champion, and not much of a fuck is given. And after we fast forward through the WrestleMania report, mostly to avoid having to look at Todd Pettingill's ugly face, our main event is Jerry Lawler versus Bret Hart, where the King is still on a mission to prove that the Hitman is a racist. And to make sure we all know that Lawler is not the racist in this situation, well, of course, he's got Bull Nakano by his side. Oh, well, that solves that mystery. Clearly, it's Bret that has the prejudice against Japanese people. For the record, this whole thing is incredibly fucking stupid. The whole Lawler conflict with Bret over him being voted Wrestler of the Year in the PWI magazine because Lawler insinuated that the Japanese vote didn't count. Like, seriously. What the fuck are we doing? Can we just go back to Lawler making fun of Bret's parents for being old and decrepit? At least that was funny, to some degree. Like, this is just stupid and fake beyond belief. Nobody buys this shit. And it ultimately kind of affected my enjoyment of the match. Just because I knew that as soon as Bull Nakano came out with Lawler, I knew she was going to get involved somehow. Take out the angles and the random shots of Akushi in the aisleway. The wrestling side of things was pretty good. I mean, Bret and Jerry have had 100 better matches in the past together, but it was fine. You just had all this nonsense going on outside the ring that kind of prevented me from calling it anything beyond just fine. The visuals of Akushi and Shinja were wacky because they're just standing in the aisleway like complete stones, unmoving. And they look like two cardboard cutouts they put in the middle of the aisleway. And they never got involved. They were just there. I guess because they're eventually going to do Bret versus Akushi. So they needed to plant the seeds there since Lawler's going around calling Bret a racist. So now we're back to that conversation of them already throwing WrestleMania under the bus to set up shit for afterwards. And of course, the finish. After Bret and Jerry are on the floor fighting, they do this spot where the King tries to restrain Bret so Bull can punch him in the face. Of course, Bret ducks. So Bull accidentally punches Lawler. Right in plain view of the ref, by the way. Not a DQ. And, something else happened at the end. All I remember is Bull grabbed Bret's ankle to prevent him from breaking the 10 count. So Bret gets counted out. Apparently, I'm supposed to buy that a 130-pound woman was capable of restraining a 220-pound grown man. And she actually won the battle for power. I don't know, dude. I mean, to be fair, JC did claim she was 250 pounds. That may be slightly exaggerated. So, I mean, the post stuff with Bret beating up Jerry, that was all fine. The crap with Akushi and Bull Nakano, that all mostly sucked. But I get why they did it. It's probably one of the more forgettable Bret Hart feuds if you look through his career. But that's kind of all there is to say about it. You know, it's a standard WWF booking where you take a very simple match on paper, overbook it into oblivion, and then try to get all fancy with a sports entertainment presentation. But obviously that doesn't spell the end for Lawler versus Brett. We're going to be seeing that whole feud recirculate in the coming months. And as for the rest of the show, well, we did get a great swerve to close everything out. It appeared that Double J was about to accept a rematch with Barry Horowitz for a title match next week. And right as Barry was about to sign the paperwork, Bob Backlund comes in from behind, chokes out Horowitz with a chicken wing, and then he signs the contract. But what made the whole thing so great is that Jarrett's there egging Backlund on, like, yeah, get him, Bob, get him. And then right as Backlund grabs the pen and signs the contract, the mood completely shifts as Jarrett realizes, oh shit, this guy's about to steal Barry's title match. So now Jarrett's in deep water because supposedly he has to defend the title against Backlund next week. And for the record, yes, apparently you could just do that. I guess we were meant to believe it was an open contract, so there's no legal bearing. Whoever signs that name on the dotted line, that's who gets the title match. So Jarrett may have fucked up on that one. But it was at least a good swerve. I liked it. You know, Jarrett's always great at selling the idiot dolt who gets outsmarted. So, provided that ends up happening next week, well, it'll at least be another solid main event to look forward to. And again, I actually didn't think the show was all that bad this week. I wouldn't classify it as good either. Like, Diesel and Shawn weren't even on the show. Again, that's the WWF title match for WrestleMania. I mean, they've done virtually nothing to amp up excitement for that feud. And that one's been ongoing since the fall of last year, right? Back in what? November? And that's when Diesel turned face and split away from Shawn, right? Yeah, they've done a rotten job building that one up. And they've only now started recognizing the Brett Backlund stuff again. Even though Brett is currently sidetracked with like 8 other feuds at the moment. And LT versus Bam Bam continues to be the main attraction. It's the story of WrestleMania 11. It's the Bam Bam LT show. You don't remember much else about the card. But you remember LT versus Bam Bam. Gee, I wonder why. So, SmackDown. By the way, have I ever mentioned how much this theme music sucks? Not that I've ever been blown away with WWF's choice of opening themes. But this little hip-hop theme they got for SmackDown now, God, it's atrocious. I mean, I probably said that at least 20 times since we started doing these SmackDown reviews. But, figured I'd mention it again for old time's sake. As a semi-pro musician, I think I'm qualified to share my personal opinion on what I think of most mainstream indie music. Most of it is garbage. Kind of like how a lot of the show is garbage. Except for a hand-select few parties. I mean, it really is the running theme every week. SmackDown is a show that mainly centers around one, sometimes 2 things. If it doesn't directly involve the Bloodline, no one really cares. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get something involving Logan Paul that's actually good. This week was a swing and a miss. But, outside those two main sources, there's really not a whole lot going on. Not a lot of gripping, captivating material. A lot of it's meaningless. And it's really not hooking people in one way or the other. People watch, but they're definitely not invested. And as you'll see as we run down some of the card this week, it's not hard to imagine why. But we do kick it off with Logan Paul, oddly enough. And he's being Logan Paul. He's a great, smug, arrogant prick that knows how to generate heat from the crowd. The issue here is that he spent like 5 minutes doing lame sponsor plugs for that stupid energy drink that nobody gives a fuck about. And the payoff is them revealing a giant Prime logo in the middle of the ring, with him basically saying it's going to be a staple piece of all the premium live specials going forward. They're just going to have a giant Prime logo plastered in the middle of the ring, a la UFC. And it's like, okay, and that's great and all, but what does that really have to do with the wrestling end of things? Well, of course, cue Randy Orton, who literally slithers into the ring from out of the void. Have no idea where he came from. And after Logan narrowly escapes an RKO, he ends up giving one to KSI, or whatever Logan's buddy's name was. And the payoff was him picking up the Prime drink, which basically looked like a giant bottle of Pepto-Bismol, and then pouring it all over KSI's lifeless body in the middle of the ring. It was cute. Slapstick comedy. That's all I can really say about it. It took him 10 minutes to get to the point with all this. Once you get past all the ring intros and all the long milking of crowd responses. Literally so Orton could come out, RKO Logan's flunky, and then dump a bottle of energy drink on him. Yet this is somehow supposed to get me to want to see Logan versus Randy for the US title at WrestleMania. This is their plan to get me to care. So far, I am not impressed. I love Logan's heel work. He's a great villain. Arguably, probably the best heel in the business today. But this really just isn't a very engaging story right now. Logan Paul just fucked this guy out of a world title match at WrestleMania. Shouldn't Orton be pissed? Somehow his comeback plan was to show up on SmackDown, RKO the Prime co-founder, and then dump the drink all over his face? Kind of sounds like child play if you ask me. But I'm not the booker, so what do I know? And all of this to set up what, you ask? A tag team match pitting Grayson Fodder and Austin Theory against Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. Kevin Owens is finally going gray in the beard. After all these years. All that time away from Sammy's really done a number on the poor guy. Now he looks like even more of a homeless bum than he did before graying. So, well, if you had to think about what was going to happen here for 2 seconds, you've probably never seen an Austin Theory match in your entire life. Of course he wound up doing the job in the end. Were you really surprised? I mean, there really wasn't much to say about the match until the last 2 minutes. The setup for the finish was kind of cool, with Grayson Fodder running into a stunner, and that led into KO launching Theory up for basically like a pop-up RKO spot. Didn't necessarily look smooth, but it was a cool idea in theory. Pee. Anyway, well, then Logan Paul tried to jump the faces afterwards and give Randy the brass knuck shot, but Randy avoided it, tried to grab the gimmick from him, and narrowly avoided hitting KO instead. And they had a pretty tense face-off before fist bumping and getting back on the same page. God, I'm really hoping they don't go the direction I'm afraid they're going to take this, by making that title match a 3-way at Mania. I mean, I don't put anything past WWE at this point because they love themselves some multi-man matches. By that same token, technically, KO never wrapped up his beef with Logan Paul from the Royal Rumble. So if they were going to go the 3-way route, I wouldn't be all that shocked. I would rather see Orton versus Paul one-on-one. But we'll see what they plan on doing. I've never liked the dynamic of 3-ways where you got 2 baby faces and 1 heel. It just never worked for me. But again, that's not set in stone yet, so I'll kind of wait off on my prejudgment. The moral to the story is Austin Theory loses again. Yippee. What does that bring his record to now? It's like 5 wins and 377 losses since spring of 2022. Lovely. Just lovely. It's exactly how you build up a young prodigy. You just beat him to a pulp over and over again and hope that people stop viewing him as a megastar. I mean, it's worked great for the WWE machine for the last 20 plus years. It's why they haven't had a major star in their company since John Cena. So following that, we had a little bit of Lifetime soap opera drama with the girls. Bayley moaned and whined about Damage Control turning on her. Naomi and her weird-looking hairdo had some tense words with Bianca Belair. The acting was beyond appalling. Somehow Bianca got through that segment without bursting out into laughter looking at Naomi's ridiculous hairstyle. I have no idea how. She looked absurd. And then Bobby Lashley finally had a match with Karrion Kross after 2 months of holding it off? Seriously, how long has this feud actually been going? It's felt like 10 years. And most of it's been faction warfare. So they finally do the match between the 2 captains, so to speak. To this day, I still have no idea why these guys are fighting or why any of this faction warfare started to begin with. The match is not very good. I mean, Bobby Lashley is a genetic freak, but he also doesn't move the same way he did 10 or so years ago when he was more agile. Kross gets more out of shape every time I see him. That guy's completely given up trying. It's just a plain example of a 2 guys going through the motions match. There was no life to it. There was no energy to it. It got slower and slower the longer it went. I mean, Lashley was really tired by the end. And of course, right as Lashley's setting up Kross for the spear, The Authors of Pain hit the ring for the blatant disqualification. That brings out the Street Profits 2 seconds later. Theme music and all. Had to get that queued up. Almost like they were waiting for it to happen. I mean, I figured there wasn't going to be a clean finish. But my God, how uncreative can you get? It kind of epitomizes the whole feud from the beginning. Very uncreative and very uninspiring. I mean, it's why I've tuned a lot of their segments out, because the truth is I'm really not missing out on a whole lot. I mean, there's no real feud or beef here beyond these guys just fighting for the fuck all of it. Like, I'm not even trying to be facetious when I ask the question, but why are they mad at each other? Does anybody know? Did they ever establish why Karrion Kross and the AOP targeted Lashley and the Street Profits? Was there an incentive? Did Lashley fuck Scarlett behind the scenes and Kross found out about it? What is going on here? I don't know. I mean, I completely forgot Lashley and the Profits were technically babyfaces. They've been heels for so long on television, I kind of forgot that they were the protagonists in all of this. But yeah, it's just not doing much for me. For as long as they've been drawing this program out, I don't think there's really a suitable endgame. I mean, if it's going to lead to a 6-man tag at one of the 2 nights at WrestleMania, it's not really going to have a satisfying payoff regardless of who wins. Because nothing about this feud warranted getting a slot on a WrestleMania card. Maybe if they had a pre-show, you could throw it on there. But I don't know. It's just, there's nothing appealing about it. And that's not a reflection of the talent pool. That's a reflection on the booking team doing a piss-poor job making this meaningful. Speaking of guys I haven't made meaningful in God knows how long. Dragon Lee. Yeah, remember that name? Boy, what a fall from grace for that poor bloke. He got punked out by the LWO in the back. Just made him look like a total job guy. Wow. Great signing, guys. I'm sure you're super proud of that one. Yeah, I had to make sure they signed him away from Tony Khan. Because that guy was a hot prospect. Got to lock him into a big contract so he could do jack all of shit. Fucking morons. You know, at least with someone like a Tiffany Stratton, regardless of whether or not the day comes where I ever decide to watch one of her matches, at least they're fucking trying with her. You know, she's at least being presented like somebody that matters. Not getting sucker punched and beat up in a 30-second pre-tape after not having been seen in months. So she wrestled Michin Yim, or Mia Michin, or Mama Mia Michin Yim, or whatever she's going by these days. I best remember her as Mia Yim, so we'll go with that. Doesn't matter, because she got beat. Like I said, though, at least with Tiffany, they're giving her some shine. They're putting her out there, giving her a chance. Whether or not it pans out in the end, well, that remains to be seen. I mean, personally, I'd rather see them try to focus on Jade Cargill just to see whether or not her AEW flop was self-inflicted, or if Tony Khan really is just that flippant. I mean, the fact that she hasn't wrestled a regular match on the main roster, outside the one Rumble appearance, it's probably a little concerning. I mean, I know it's always been Jade's biggest setback, was the ring work side of things, but I I mean, the fact that Tiffany Stratton is getting the bigger push right now instead of Jade, especially as they're going into Mania season, yeah, it's probably not a good sign. But in completely unrelated news, LA Knight beat up a TV monitor in the back. Just beat it to powder with a chair. And I got to be honest, up to that point, it was probably the most entertaining thing on the entire show. I mean, it was by far the realest looking fight I'd seen up to that point. Looked better than anything I saw from Lashley and Cross when they were moving around the ring like glaciers. Unfortunately, that was only a 45-second pre-tape in the back. And then it was right back to the ring for more stuff I didn't care about, such as Angel Garza versus Dragon Lee. They had a very sloppy lucha match that nearly ended in tragedy a couple times. The most obvious moment was the spot where Lee tried to give Garza a sit-out powerbomb, but couldn't hoist Garza up to slam him. So he nearly dropped him right on the back of his neck and killed him. But in general, it was very indie. Relied way too much on the flashy, high-risk stuff. God almighty, sometimes I just want to reach through my monitor and grab these guys by the neck and say, grab a fucking hold, you dipshits. Wrestle. Quit doing fucking cartwheels and backflips. It's so angry watching these modern wrestling shows anymore. Oh, no, here's the best part, too. After Dragon Lee wins with a cradle, the heels immediately kick the shit out of him again. Second time on one show. Great. So he can't even get his revenge after being laid out in the back moments prior. They still had to beat him up and make him look like a geek. And I have no idea where Carlito and Ray were during all this. The announcer said they weren't in the building. But there was never an explanation as to why. Travel, prior commitments, food poisoning, diarrheal explosion. I don't know. They just weren't there. Apparently because they had this heat angle planned. So they needed to make sure no babyfaces were around to make the save. And again, this conversation kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Lashley and Cross. Too much faction warfare going on. The problem, I thought, was supposed to be between Ray and Santos. Isn't that how this all started? Right now, they're just muddying up the waters by throwing in all the flunkies to cram the scene. Too many interchangeable bodies getting involved when they're not needed. It's too much of a cluster. I mean, if the feud is supposed to be about Ray and Santos, make it about those guys. Have them cut promos on each other. Give us their history in a VTR package. Get us to care about these guys. Not whatever is going on with Dragon Lee and Santos Escobar. The ship has long since sailed on Dragon Lee, people. They blew their window of opportunity with that guy months ago. We've moved on. And so should they. But now that we're past all the marginal nonsense, let's talk about the important matter for this week. It is time for Cody and Seth to answer the challenge. The Rock laid out the gauntlet last week. He wants the tag match with Cody and Seth on night one. Now the ball is in their court. Biggest WrestleMania match of all time. So they claim. I mean, at least in comparison to anything I've seen in the last 20 years, it might seem that way. So as per usual with WWE, After about 20 minutes of them stalling and holding off to actually getting to a point, we do finally get the confrontation with Cody and Seth and the Bloodline. And they do accept the challenge. The only thing I kept wondering the whole time they were out there was how in the fuck anybody kept a straight face looking at Seth in that ridiculous getup. What was he wearing? He looked like Violet Beauregard, but dressed in black. Not kidding. It's like they took Rollins, filled him up with helium, and they were just waiting for that guy to pop. He looked so goofy. Meanwhile, Cody's there in a suit, just being a normal average guy. God almighty. But, oh, and the other funny part, too, is he has to stand there with a straight face and go, "These are the 4 biggest stars in WWE today." Now that was comedy. Me having to take that statement seriously while Rollins is dressed in that. But there was some banter here with Rock and Cody before Rollins interjected and told Rock that they accept the challenge. Then Roman made fun of Cody for letting this cross-dressing honky speak on his behalf. And it all led to the big photo finish where Rock started talking about Cody's siblings, saying that he's the youngest of 3 by at least 20 years, but everybody knows that Cody was the accident in the family. To which Cody responds by slapping the taste out of Rock's mouth. And, well, that was basically how they went out. That was their cliffhanger, so to speak. A little bit of revenge from what happened at the Mania press conference when Rock did the same thing to Cody. It was a good receipt. I have no issues with that. And, I mean, the promo stuff was kind of meh. I wasn't really blown away with this interaction. I mean, everyone just kind of took turns saying their lines. It all came off very structured and very formatted. That's always the thing I've hated about WWE promo segments. The whole artificially contrived nature of how everything's delivered. I mean, I guess the other big talking point here was Rock mentioning that because he's on the board of directors now, he basically oversees the authority of all the talent. So he does have the ability to fuck with Cody's career if he wants to. He may not have the power to book, but he's got more company stroke on the higher end, which basically means that if Cody doesn't win the belt from Roman, Rock will see it that Cody never gets a title shot again. Now, again, it's not entirely explained how he has the authority to do that, other than I'm on the board. But I do get the argument of I can sway particular creative directions if times call for drastic measures. So there is at least a bit of suspense with what could happen in that realm. All in all, though, I don't think it was very groundbreaking news that Cody and Seth would accept the offer. We all pretty much knew that to be the case. But they are at least trying to add some wrinkles in there that haven't been explored yet. Playing into Rock's position on the board of directors now, you know, that's interesting, and we'll see how they kind of work that into a story. Now Cody has another stumbling block to overcome, because if Rock decides to stay heel after Mania and continues to fuck with Cody, he could feasibly do that from behind the scenes. But again, though, we'll have to see what the plans are for Rock post-Mania, because, I mean, I'm still not convinced he's going to stick around after Mania. But that was SmackDown. Same thing I always say every week. It's the Bloodline show. And we're in the thick of it right now with the Cody-Roman title feud. I mean, they are still making a much bigger deal out of the tag match on night 1, but I think that's more of a guessing game with what the stipulation is going to be. Whether or not the title match is going to wind up being a Bloodline rules, no DQ match, or just a regular match with everybody banned from ringside. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what direction they'll take it, which I guess is a good thing. I mean, God, if you're sick of the Bloodline interference in Roman title matches, you're probably really hoping Cody and Seth go over on night one. I wish I could envision being it that simple, but WWE has a knack for crushing hopes and dreams. So I'm not keeping my fingers crossed for that one. So that leaves us with Retro NXT. I don't believe this will take that long to get through. Really not much happening on this one of notable intrigue. I mean, we're only a couple weeks removed from the Arrival show, and we still have a while before the first takeover in May. So it's mostly a buffer period we're in right now where they're teasing some feuds, but they're also trying to get over some new names and new gimmicks, some of which are more appealing than others. I did like how they flat out broke the fourth wall in the first 2 minutes by welcoming Jason Bloom back to the color booth, basically inferring it's a much better name than Tenzai. I agree. Not that I remember much about Tenzai's WWE run, but I do remember it flopped pretty quickly. So the opener is Paige versus Sasha Banks. Not exactly the most promising way to open up a wrestling show. It's, I always joke about it, but it's kind of true. They're far and away better than fucking Summer Rae. But that's also like me asking, what tastes worse? Shit stew or piss soup? I didn't outright skip over the whole match, but seriously, this is how we're opening the show. It was a very mediocre 8-minute match with a couple of sloppy catfight spots, a lot of screaming, and a lot of me walking in and out of the room to do other shit while it was going on. I don't know what you want me to say about it. I'm still astonished by the fact that people actually see star power in Sasha Banks, or Mercedes Moné, whatever her fucking name is now. She's incredibly overrated in my book. I'm sorry. I don't see it. I never did. Paige is no better. But at least her shit doesn't look like middle school catfighting on the playground. She's also got a decent bit of size to her. Sasha's like 90 pounds soaking wet with her fucking twig-looking arms. Like, there's a spot here where Sasha had Paige in the corner, just giving her these weak, sissy-ass looking clubs to the back. Honestly, I can't even call them club spots. I've seen soccer moms in more believable looking fights. So fake looking. So Paige won. No surprise there. And then Charlotte attacked her afterwards until Natty ran down to send the heels packing. It's all very formulaic WWE booking. Heel jump attacks the babyface. Random babyface comrade runs down to even the odds. Heels run away like cowards. You could write that angle in your sleep. They've obviously teased Paige and Charlotte as the next title program, so that's where it's all headed. But I get you have to keep them busy with other stuff in between, so I guess this will be the direction they go for now. We'll be seeing some tag team matches, playa. So after a little bit of motion sickness from watching the camera guy try to follow around a pacing Mojo Rawley, he's still hyped, by the way. Then we got the Ascension in their obligatory Road Warrior squash win, beating two ham and egg job guys that I didn't even bother writing names down for. We'll just call them Beavis and Butthead. The Ascension spent 90% of it killing Beavis until finally putting him away with a follow man. And that's the only thing I got out of it, aside from the commentators bringing up the question of who could knock off the Ascension. And of all fucking teams to mention, Matt Bloom says, and I quote, "I'm not sure. Maybe the Usos?" The Usos. In 2014. Right. I think I was still having trouble differentiating between the two by this point. I mean, at least in 2024, they're now on separate brands where I know which one is Jimmy and which one's Jay. But yeah, the Usos. Yeah, that's the team that's going to come in and hand the Ascension their first loss. It's funny because now that I think of it, does anybody remember who actually beat the Ascension in WWE? I mean, it probably happened on the main roster. It was so long ago. But, like, I don't know. It's all a blur. I mean, when you really think about it, the Ascension is kind of a lost and forgotten about tag team in wrestling. They were here, then they were gone. And no one cared. So here's a little tidbit of history for all you old-timers out there. Remember when WWE used to run those WWE Facts VTRs where they would just rattle off a bunch of obscure, random statistics that nobody in their right mind would ever care to think about? Well, here's one. If you watch 1 hour of WWE video on-demand content, aka network footage, it would take you 3.5 years to watch it all. Well, at the rate I'm going, I'm thinking we'll probably get through the entire WWE library plus classic content by the year 2084. When I've got tubes shoved up my nose and I'm in an iron lung. Yeah, that's about when we'll probably be wrapping up the Peacock library of wrestling footage. If Peacock is still even around by that point, who even knows? And this was one of the less obscure pieces of information I've seen them run over the years. Moving along, though, in their continual efforts to get over the UK Batista, they booked Mason Ryan versus Wesley Blake, the fake cowboy. We had some nice banter here at the commentary desk where Matt Bloom was asking, is there actually something called a fake cowboy? To which I said, of course. Renee works with one in AEW right now. His name is Adam Page. The black hole of charisma of suck that he is. By the way, I still love the heckling chants from the crowd. They all clearly saw the facial resemblance with Mason Ryan and started immediately chanting, better than Batista. Still holding that grudge over the Daniel Bryan thing, I see. Match was whatever. I mean, they're obviously trying to get Mason Ryan over, but Lord knows it's working. I mean, he's a big guy with size, but there's just no flavor to him. He's got no personality. His work is subpar at best. And the people don't really seem to care one way or the other. I mean, he's like their modern-day version of Brian Cage. A giant meathead that can do a couple okay things, but just a blank slate personality. Now, they're certainly trying with him. I'll give him that. But I honestly wouldn't be shocked to see this push fizzle out sometime in the next month or so. So then we had a hideously acted skit in the back with the girls that I couldn't even stomach the ability to get through. I mean, it started off harmless enough with them doing their shameless network plugs, like having Bayley standing there with an iPad watching a Bret Hart match, saying the phrase WWE Network 1,000 fucking times in a row. I mean, people can give me flack for using the word promo a billion times per podcast episode. At least I try to space it out. This was like word spam with the amount of times they were saying WWE Network. Good God, it was annoying. Not as annoying, though, as when Charlotte and Sasha came in and started acting. And this is where I just had to skip ahead because I couldn't take it. It legitimately sounded like toddlers arguing. And they're all talking in these unnatural schoolgirl voices. And like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to get off subject with all the Vince McMahon stuff because I know it's a hot button issue at the moment. You know, all the controversy surrounding that. But I will say, there's a very WWE-like presentation with the girls that always seems very atypical and uncanny. And granted, it's not as prevalent today as it was, say, 10 or so years ago. I don't know if this was just a Vince McMahon thing, where he always wanted the girls to sound and always be catty on camera. I mean, Russo used to do the same thing in TNA. Like, he'd have all the girls call each other skanks and whores and hoes, because the guy clearly was sexually depraved at one point in his life. I mean, you couldn't watch a TNA segment without the women slandering each other. But with McMahon, it's different, though. It's the intonation of the way the girls sound. Like, grown women do not talk like this. I've had plenty of conversations with women in my day. I promise you, none of them pick fights like this. They don't talk like this. They don't act like this. It's just, you know, again, it's Vince McMahon's weird fetish with the idea of how he thought women should be perceived on television. Man, now that all these stories are coming out about him, I mean, whether or not they're all entirely true, doesn't matter. But you go back and watch these old segments with the divas on WWE television from 15, 20 years ago. Is it any wonder people are turned off by it? Is it any wonder people have questions? Who could watch this? It's horrid. It's Glow levels of acting. And trust me, Glow was not a bastion of wrestling history that we like to reflect back on. So this sucked. Then we had Xavier Woods versus Alexander Rusev for, I don't know, possibly their 87th match in the last 2 months. And folks, you'll never guess what happened. No, seriously. Take a guess. That's right. Rusev killed him and beat him with the accolade. Exact same finish as the previous 86 matches they've had. They also botched a Samoan drop spot at one point where Woods nearly came down and landed right on the back of his neck. Somehow they saved it. Now, in all fairness, they shot an angle beforehand where Tyler Breeze came down and told Xavier to hit the bricks because he wanted to face Rusev instead. And that kind of goes back to the Arrival show where Rusev interrupted their match and left them both laying. I think this was mostly just Breeze baiting Xavier in because, I mean, once Rusev came out, Breeze just kind of blindsided Xavier from behind and then walked to the back. So he either got cold feet or it was a legit setup. But Xavier Woods jobs again. And Rusev continues to improve every week. He's really good at what he does. I mean, I was saying this shit 10 years ago when I saw him. Before he ever debuted on the main roster. I was like, watch out for this guy. He could be the next Vince McMahon pet project. Hard to imagine WWE dropped the ball on him, right? Yeah. So, before we talk about the next match, I have to mention this. The backstage altercation between Neville and Bo Dallas, with Neville sporting his I'm ready for preschool plaid dress shirt. He looked like such a fucking tool. But here's the best part. While Devin is standing there, holding a mic out for both men to talk into, as soon as the heat starts to escalate, she powders, taking the mic with her, obviously. And of course, while Bo continues the promo, is the audio affected in any way? Nope. Sounds perfectly normal. So for all of you production sticklers out there, yes, Devin was in fact holding a fake microphone. I love how this company has no issues breaking the fourth wall in production. They have totally stopped giving a fuck. So the main event is Big Cass versus Bo Dallas. Oh, by the way, I should point out the big takeaway from that previous segment. Aside from the blatant production gaffe, we are in fact getting Bo Dallas and Adrian Neville on TV in 2 weeks for the NXT title. I neglected to mention that. For the record, yes, they are following a ladder match with a regular singles match. Of course they are. You know, all things considered, I thought this was actually a pretty good main event. I mean, they definitely booked it right by playing to both guys' strengths. You had Big Cass in control early on and using his size to outpower Bo. Eventually, Bo was able to cut off Cass at the knees and work him over for the heat. Gave the fans plenty of time to rally up their Bo Dallas heckle chants. We had Pocahontas. We had Bo Ring. Whatever they could think up on the fly. But again, Bo's a great Weasley heel, using all kinds of underhanded tactics to gain the upper hand. And right as Cass is making his comeback toward the end, Bo lures Cass into the rope so he could snap the middle one back into his eye to blind him. And that set up Bo so he could hit the double arm DDT to get the pin. It is still very weird seeing Cass being used as job fodder with Enzo still being out with a leg injury. But you know, I guess he is kind of that babyface that you can beat over and over again, and it's not going to diminish the act. You know, the fans still do the soft chants. They still like the gimmick. So that's kind of built in. Again, I liked it for what it was. Bo Dallas getting a win back is a good setup for his rematch with Neville in a couple weeks. Yeah, no complaints with this one. Not really much to say about it as a whole, but it was done effectively. Bo continues to be one of my favorite talents on the show right now. Sucks he's only around for maybe a couple more months before he gets called up to the main roster. But he's been a breath of fresh air on this show. Great personality, great talent, great worker. It's unfortunate he kind of fell through the cracks in the WWE machine. Whatever they originally had planned for him with the whole Uncle Howdy thing last year, as bad as a lot of that was, albeit it would have been nice to kind of see Bo back as a full-time worker. If they do ever decide to bring him back in a full capacity, rehashing this gimmick, that might not be a bad way to go. If you really think about it, it would totally fit in today just like it did 10 years ago. It's generally the same audience. But we'll see. But that's all I really had for this one. Main event was solid, but just really not a whole lot going on outside of that. It's that period between the big shows where they're only really kind of starting to tease stuff for the TakeOver card, but nothing's set in stone. So I think a lot of this was very promo match-centric and not so heavy in the angle department. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a simplistic wrestling show. Doesn't leave a whole lot of room for discussion beyond the subtle things we talk about during the matches. But then again, when I'm watching Alexander Rusev beat up Xavier Woods for the millionth time in 2 consecutive months, where's that conversation going to go? It's the same thing over and over again. As is the Ascension smashing over dudes in tag matches. We're still a ways out from that golden era of NXT when all the big names from the indies show up and people are genuinely enthused about the state of the product. 2014 to 2015 was a very weird time in the sense that there was almost like a transition period happening around this point. It's the old WWE format of NXT going back to like the FCW days. And you can see they're trying to slowly phase that out and go with this more modernized Ring of Honor presentation in the next few years. Where again, I think match quality starts to become the thing of focus for a lot of people out there. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of that. Match quality isn't necessarily something I would say NXT is delivering on right now. But in terms of character development and star power and trying to actually craft some names, they are doing that. Not everything's a home run. Not everything's stuck. But there's definitely an attempt to build up new stars. This is what the old developmental model of NXT was kind of built around. And unfortunately, they kind of got away from that in the next several years. But, then again, you kind of look at this old NXT model where they're actually going out of their way to craft new star power. And what happened to a lot of them? Discount a hand-select few of guys. They all got served up for Vince on the main roster so he could cut their feet out from under them. And that was like one of the first things I ever did on the channel. Go back. It was like summer of 2021, I think. That was when I put up that long podcast episode where I went through like the entire history of the NXT roster and talked about whether or not they actually benefited from getting called up. And again, discount like a Roman Reigns or a Seth Rollins. How many of them actually flourished? Not a lot. It's in the low percentile. Many of them aren't even working for the company anymore. And it's a reflection of a lot of things, but that's kind of the story of NXT. What used to be a developmental platform to help Vince create his next generation of stars. It all kind of stopped at the Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, to a lesser extent, Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley state. It's kind of sad. I mean, when did Roman get called up to the main roster? It was probably what? About 10 years ago? Maybe a little before that? What do we have to show for it since? What was the old NXT model compared to the new one? Again, I don't want to go into a deep dive about that again, but I highly encourage people to go back and check out that long podcast show we did, because it'll give you perspective. It really will. So, I think that'll about wrap up things for this episode. Appreciate anybody that comes back to check out the show every week. And when we reconvene on Friday, we'll get back to the classic reviews. And again, I'm keeping that WrestleMania weekend on my radar here, because depending on how long those two cards are, I'm highly questioning how much I actually want to try to fill up for that podcast. I mean, as of right now, as I scroll down the Wikipedia page, we have one match announced for night 1, 2 matches announced for night 2, and 3 matches that are yet to be determined. So, I mean, they got a lot of placeholder stuff they got to fill up for that card. I'm interested to see what they end up going with. But knowing the way WWE handles a lot of these premium live events, I wouldn't be surprised if they do about 5 matches per show and then 2 hours of promos. But we will see. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will catch you later this week. Peace out.